Well, we're now reaching our final panel of today, and since everyone is probably very fed up of hearing from me at this point, I am going to give the job of asking the tough questions to Diva Tamai, who is Chief of Innovation and Education at EIT Digital. So Diva, tell us about making deep tech startups investable and introduce your panelists.
Hearing from you, by the way. Okay, so for this last panel, which is about making deep tech startups investable, I know, daunting task, I'm going to call up on the stage Ian Goetz, CEO and co-founder of IQM Quantum Computers. Ian, please. Choose your seat. Natalia, Olson-Urtecho, Director for Governments at the Plug and Play Tech Center. And Danielle Carew, deep tech investor and ex-principal at IQ Capital. A round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. Okay, so I think what we are here doing today in addressing this very important topic is bringing to the table the unique perspectives that you all have, because you all have such diverse backgrounds. So I think maybe as an initial sort of breaking the ice moment, I would like to go very quickly, 1 minute each, but just share a little bit about your background, what you worked on, what you're doing now, so that the audience can understand really what kind of elements you're bringing to the table. So maybe we start with you, Daniel.
Yeah, sure. All right. Good to see everyone here today, and thanks to the organizers for the invite to speak. So my background, I'm an engineer. I was trained in Toronto, came to the UK and did a PhD. I led software development teams for a few years at large banks, and then I've been in venture capital ever since. So I worked at one of the early deep tech funds in London, and then industry-specific deep tech fund, Seraphim Space, and most recently at IQ Capital, which is a specialist deep tech investor, which I'm now transitioning out of, do my own thing. But at every stage, I always look for breakthrough technologies at either university spin-out level up to about Series B, and across any type of deep tech area, right? Whether it be electronics, bio, construction, space, etc. So it doesn't really matter the industry vertical. I invest in AI, climate, defense, and so on, but it's about that, underlying kind of breakthrough technology, and then building a really big company out of that. So I tend to work with founders to help them, build that technology into a category leader. And I guess so far it's gone pretty well. I've got 5 unicorns, three IPOs in NASDAQ, and
nice work.
It's working.
Okay, Ian.
Yeah, so thanks for having me.
Sure.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm a physicist by training. I got my education in Munich and then first decided actually to pursue a scientific career, which brought me at some point to Finland, to Aalto University, where I did a postdoc. And then when I told my professor that I would continue elsewhere with my scientific career, he said, well, why don't you stay and we create a company together? Okay. And of course, I had no clue what this means, but I thought, okay, why not? This sounds interesting. We found 2 more co-founders, so there are 4 of us. This was 2018, we raised the first round, then 2019. Since then, we have raised 2 more rounds and have grown the company to what is at the moment Europe's largest effort to build quantum computers.
What was the total capital you raised?
I think around 180 million, if you add all of those numbers.
Okay, great, thank you. Natalia, we should tell the audience we didn't plan this.
No, we didn't, but this sounds,
it's like
looks
I texted
great.
you in the morning. What are you wearing?
Power of pink, right, Anna? So Natalia Olson, I am a serial entrepreneur, started several companies, but I'm also a public policy person. I was vice minister of our Ministry of Businesses, translating that into the European terms of Barack Obama. And I actually, grew up all over the world. I believe very much that the world is smaller than you think about today, and that scientists, researchers, investors, policy people can come together. I work for Plug and Play, which is one of the largest seed capital investors in the world, 55 offices, born in Silicon Valley. We have 35 unicorns, and we believe in investing in over 22 verticals, so from semiconductors to pet health. And we really believe that the entrepreneur is actually a key part of that. And you can have several degrees or you cannot have any degrees. But the point is that as investors and as entrepreneurs, when we start something, we started with the idea of doing something right, of solving a problem, of figuring out what's the best for our citizens and our communities. And on that note, we believe very much in startups. We want for startups to become large corporates. And so that's why I'm here. So thank you so much for inviting me. And we do have a large presence in Europe, and we're opening more offices every day.
Thank you for coming, Natalia. So thank you actually all for coming. This is a very important panel because, as you may know, in the studio room, we were doing the EAT Digital Challenge Finals. This is a European scale-up contest for digital deep tech startups, scale-ups, I should say, that we do every year. And we decided to run this one in parallel to the annual conference. So later on, we will have an award ceremony on the stage just after our panel. But I think what's relevant is that the judges are now decreeing the winners. So the founders should all be in this room. And we have about 20 finalists, so 40 founders. So I made it a point to make sure that we would address topics that are also relevant for them and beneficial for them. So we have 2 investors, 1 deep tech founder, so we really have an interesting view on what makes a deep tech startup investable. So let's kick off by maybe asking each one of you, and Natalia, maybe we start from you this time. What is your interpretation of deep tech? It's kind of becoming a buzzword in a way, but there is an interpretation to it. What is yours?
Well, mine in particular is it's long-term research that we are converting into technology that is actually usable and it's commercialized for the greater use of civilization. Because we've been using deep tech since the 80s. Our post office used it to figure out writing, and that's how we have more efficient post office. We used it in our Department of Defense, and that's why we have the internet. I mean, we have been using deep tech for a long time, and I think it is that type of research that hasn't seen the light of day, that comes from our labs, comes from our scientists, but it hasn't been commercialized. And it's great, it's called deep tech, but I want for folks to understand it's everyday tech, because we use AI, we use all of this in every day of our lives, especially in the last 20 years. And we just put great names to it, but at the same time, it makes our lives easier.
Beautiful. What about you, Ian, as a founder of a deep tech company?
Well, from a founder's perspective, I would say when it's really hard.
the main feature.
But maybe just to add on this, I think also some characteristics is that it's not an incremental technology, but it's a disruptive technology in a sense that it's really doing something different. So if you take quantum as an example, it's not that we increase the computing power by a factor of 2 or 3 following Moore's law or whatever, but it's really kind of doing it in a completely different way so that you can do stuff that otherwise you would never be able to do, because those calculations, they would take thousands of years, even on our biggest supercomputers, right? So I think this aspect is also important, that we don't just take something that's already there and just make it a little bit different and a little bit better, but we do something completely new and disruptive.
Absolutely. And maybe on just keep going and tell us what your company does so that we understand in real life what it means.
Well, we build quantum computers. So in this sense, I think building computers already is a challenge, and we kind of lost a lot of the know-how in Europe, right? This is one of the challenges. So if you build a company that builds computers, you face all of those challenges, like where to get the talent from when nobody in Europe knows anymore how to do semiconductor tech, how to do all this chips kind of stuff. And then, of course, you do it based on a new technology. But we think it's worth the effort, and unfortunately, we don't have any of those big giants like in the US or in China. You have big tech companies who build computers who also go into the quantum space. We don't have those companies in Europe anymore. So basically the question as a society we have to ask ourselves is, okay, do we want to own the technology in the future, or do we want to become dependent? And if we say we want to own it, then who's going to do it? And then basically it always falls back to the startups because no one else is doing it. So this is what we are trying to achieve, is kind of being a global player in the quantum computing business, which is hard, and therefore it's deep tech.
Of course. Thank you.
I agree with everything he said.
Yeah.
I've had the privilege of looking at his technology really early on, and it's very cool. I mean, it falls into my definition of deep tech, which is it's a breakthrough, right? I look for technology which is surprising, basically, because then, you know, what I tend to do is watch the technology landscape, and then when something comes up and it's like, wow, I didn't expect that, right? That's, you know, when you found something that's really, really, really interesting. And it has the possibility of kind of changing industries, right? And I think, you know, the heritage of venture capital, you know, comes from Silicon Valley and 1945 in semiconductors. And I think, you know, we sort of went off the path a bit into software, but I think it's now sort of, you know, swinging back to these kind of fundamental breakthrough type technologies which build category leaders, which change industries, right? And I think that's the really important thing for Europe, right? We really need to build these billion-dollar companies which are category leaders and the next sort of industry champions all across Europe. So,
I mean, the role of investors here is really important, right? And so this leads up to my follow-up question. Our CEO, Federico Mena, this morning told us that European deep tech startups raised in the past year, in 2022, $17.7 billion, which is less than 2021, but 60% more than 2020. Now, but of this bulk amount, 50% is coming from US and China in the later stages of investment. So the question is, do you think EU investors hesitant to invest in deep tech? And is this perhaps more than a European, a global problem? Yes, no? What do you think?
Yeah, I guess I have a slightly provocative opinion on this. I think every investor is hesitant to invest in deep tech, right? I think every investor is looking for super high reward for low risk, right? That's basically what everyone's doing. So, you know, how things evolved in that, you know, SaaS became quite a great way of, you know, leveraging all the deep tech stuff that had gone into servers and cloud and whatnot, and then that became like a quite attractive like investment vehicle to park venture capital money into. Now, I mean, you mentioned a couple trends there, right? I think, you know, the great power competition between US and China with sort of EU in the mix is gonna really sort of change how you know deep tech is funded. And I think that's going to push investors to take a harder look at deep tech, because I think as a society, now's the time when we really need to look at it from a societal perspective, from an economic perspective, and from a sort of strategic national perspective. And I think the other thing that's happened is that ChatGPT's come along, right? And suddenly all these businesses, which I sort of characterized as digital transformation type software businesses, I think the unit economics of you know, marketing and sales in those businesses is gonna become worse, in my personal opinion, which means that I think we'll naturally see lots more investors moving into deep tech, and I think we're gonna have to get much better at growing these deep tech businesses and building these champions. So you know, investors, we can always get better at doing what we're doing, but I think now, you know, I see the market forces moving at multiple levels that mean that I think everyone's gonna have to get good at investing in deep tech.
And it's not only about, you know, private investors. It's the government has a key role here. And you know, EIT just started in 2008. We started like our SBIC program, which is the reason why Silicon Valley was created. Guess when? 1958. So we've had a long path to this. What we did was, through this program, is we empowered the investors. We gave the funding for the investors to go and invest with the most disruptive things ever. And we let them invest. We didn't like nag them or bug them. And so we said, you guys know what you're doing. We're policymakers. We'll fit on this side. And so I think there's a real responsibility for governments to be the catalyst in incentivizing investors to go out there and invest in deep tech. Mm-hmm. And that's really how we were able to create an innovative system of products and services. our STTR program, or SBIR program, which is what your Horizon funding is based on. It started in 1980. I mean, these are programs that take a long time. And I think this is where we need patient capital investors, right? Long-term investors. And I think this is where the public-private partnership really has to be stronger. We want more investors in Europe. I think this is, 50% of the investors are in my hometown in Silicon Valley, in Palo Alto, Menlo Park. But we need for that to, and during the pandemic, they realized you can invest outside, and the valuations and the value of these companies in Europe are tremendous. Why should a company in Spain or France be valued at 1 million and the same company be valued at 4 million in my hometown?
That's aberration, a market aberration. Yeah. Ian, what is your perspective from a founder's point of view? How did you live this experience?
Well, of course, in our case, I mentioned the number, the 180 million, which sounds a lot, but of course we are doing hardware. We have built a factory where we are kind of processing the chips. So you need a lot of capital just for this. So the question is, okay, how are you going to do it, especially in Europe, where maybe we don't have these very big funds. And of course, then people can complain how hard it is, but I think it's better to just find solutions. And there are solutions, right? So, of course, on the one hand side, it means you need to accept that you will probably have a much more fragmented cap table. So you need to chunk it into smaller pieces, which on the one hand side is more work for the CEO and the founders. But on the other side, of course, also it means that you're splitting up the power, right? You will not have a very, let's say, dominant investor, which might also be a good thing at one point. I think one thing still, what I experienced, which I see as a strong opportunity in Europe actually, is that we have a lot of good money in family offices. And for business like ours, where we are producing stuff, often these, let's say, industrial families, they value this a lot because it's something that they can see, that they can touch. Sure. So in our case, actually, we collected a lot of money from big family offices, which is a different type of fundraising in the end, the way you approach them, the way you talk to them and convince them. But this is kind of how we found our path. And then we mixed this also with public investments. So we have from the Commission, from the Finnish government, from the German government. And I think in this way, you're actually able to raise also large rounds. The challenge is always, this is also what I hear from others, is always on the lead investor side. Because obviously the family offices and also the public investors, they will not take the lead. So the question is, how can we create in Europe educated investors which still have enough firepower to lead big rounds? So I think that's the biggest challenge. And if we solve this, then I think we will also be able to kind of syndicate larger rounds.
Oh, very, very interesting. Do you want to follow up?
That is an excellent point. Couldn't agree with that more. I mean, quite often, I've always been in the position to be a lead. So sometimes it's just me and the couple of founders being like, okay, how are we going to put together a syndicate, right? And then we go out and find that. But I mean, quite often, we've got lots of interest, but no one's willing to price and no one's willing to really commit to saying, okay, this is going to be the next big thing. And I guess if I had one wish, right, it would be that, Europe sort of stands up that kind of fund who would be that lead. And I don't even think the ticket sizes need to be that big, right? Like, 5, 10, maybe 15 million tickets for these types of rounds, even at the late stage, to just give this confidence, because I think the one strength that Europe does have over the US and other jurisdictions is exactly what you said. These industrial families, these real champions in every kind of region. And I think if we had a fund that could do that, that would really, move the needle.
Yeah.
I mean, sorry.
Go on, Natalia.
Don't you think you would be more incentivized if you had certain fiscal incentives, like tax incentives, for you to go ahead and invest more?
Yeah. I agree with you. I think that's worked, particularly in the UK market at the early stage, right? You get to mobilize a lot of money.
Scale,
but I think I think probably for Deeptech, the problem is at the A, B, C type level, right? To get these kind of party rounds type together, I would say, to just get them kind of that unicorn type status. And I'm not certain tax incentives work so much. I don't think it's worked so well in the US at the late stage, right? I know it's worked well at the early stage, but I might be wrong.
Great. So maybe we can take this one step further and talk about the toolbox that investors have available to them. what are your toolboxes when you look at a deep tech opportunity? What do you look at? What's really important to you? And I'm addressing perhaps this one more to Daniel.
Well, for us, it's always the team, and it's made up. We always invest in the team. We invest in people. That's been the model of plug and play. But I think that one of the advantages that we have, and we've been doing this more lately, is our relationships with the university. So now we have 55 partnerships with universities across the world. Our goal is to do 100 partnerships. And what we do is not just our champion in the university are the students. So we choose a couple students, they go out there, they're looking around, they're helping connect with the young ecosystem and professors and so on. I think that's an excellent tool in our toolbox, is being in touch with what the research is happening. And I think that's what the part of commercialization of deep tech. It's the key part is that research.
Yeah, so company leadership, important.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I start with the tech first, right? Because, I think, there's two. I think in VC it goes back and forth, right? Is it the team? Is it the technology? There's been multiple people who've studied it and so on. I mean, for me, I can change the team, but it's really hard to change the tech, right? So I always start with the tech, and I'm an engineer, so that's just my personal bias. So rightly or wrongly, that's where I begin, right? And then for me, quite often in deep tech, the people who've come up with the tech have been in it for quite a long time, right? Quite often they've been at it like 10 years, right? 15 years. And for me, the very first discussion is basically, the pitch is like, guys, I can see how this could be, $1 billion sort of company, right? Based on just the technology. Is that where you want to go with it, right? And then it's, to me, a pitch discussion isn't so much them pitching to me. It's sort of like, well, how do we get ourselves on this path to create $1 billion company together, right? And then are you as founders sort of knowledgeable as kind of what that looks like, right? But by the time we get to Series B, this is going to have to be your life, right? You're going to have to be totally committed to being the CEO of this company, and you're going to have to have learned everything there is to know about this industry, or it just means we're going to have to hire an industry-specific sort of CEO. And I think as long as you have those discussions really, really early on as to what the plan is over the next 7 years with the company, then you can kind of work it out as a team, because it's ultimately between you and the founders and whoever you bring on as management and the customers, like how you create this sort of massive thing that's going to change the industry.
And maybe, Ian, a question for you here, tying it back to the team and the company leadership, which is, of course, always a very important element, but it seems like even more so in a deep tech startup. We've talked about this throughout the day today, especially the afternoon, right? Deep tech talent, how to nurture it, how to make it grow. What has your experience been with your company? Was it hard? Was it easy? Do you have to nurture it from internship level? How do you look at this?
I mean, most of those deep tech companies, they're still university spin-outs or some kind of a spin-out, right? And then in the very beginning, on the founder side, of course, you can check what's the track record of the people. And what we did actually, what really helped, and this is an advice I could give to everyone who's considering starting a company, is when we were in this kind of very early phase of the company, where we were thinking, okay, we are going to fundraise, this will be the story. We had our academic network of people we knew and people where we thought, okay, those would actually be great fit, like from a team perspective. So we called all of them and said, hey, we are going to start a company. If we get the money, would you join? And if they said yes, we gave them shares, because we could give the shares for free. So this way, actually, we had a starting team of more than 20 people. And except for one who couldn't convince his wife to come from Australia to Europe, they're all with us still. So I think that's a great approach, how in the beginning, actually, you can create a lot of traction on the team side. Of course, now we are in a situation where we are hiring. And then the question is, how do we get still the best people in a field where there is a huge shortage of talent, and where we are competing with the real big names, which pay probably, 2, 3, 4 times the salaries that we can pay. And I think here again we come back to Europe, and actually what's what brings people to Europe and to value here, because we do hire people from the US, from Australia, Singapore, but mainly these are people with a European background who went there for a postdoc or whatever, but then they think, okay, I'm now in a stage of my life where I want to start a family or something like this, and maybe I don't want to live in a 20 square meter apartment somewhere in a huge city. And I think this is a way we can actually attract talent back, and for us this has been working really, really great. We have around 250 employees at the moment.
Wow.
We have almost 50 nationalities, so it's a super diverse team, which is of course also related to the fact that we are coming from science, and in science everything is kind of free-flowing. But if you have a great kind of company with a great purpose, especially for the Generation Z, this is very important that they work for something impactful, meaningful. I think then you can attract also very good people in the current times.
The quality of life is amazing in Europe. I live between Barcelona and Palo Alto, California. I prefer Barcelona most of the time.
It's very, very true. So if we're going to look at perhaps for a second KPIs, okay, that investors look at, there's always that market traction, KPI, because commercialization is key. But we also, in a deep tech startup, really have to look at their IP strategy. That's an asset to protect. And team, we discussed this already. So is the distribution of the weight around these KPIs different when you look at a deep tech startup versus a digital, maybe SaaS model or, an incremental startup?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, absolutely, for sure, right? I think SaaS is a fantastic playbook, right? I think they've worked out the business metrics for SaaS, incredibly well, right? I actually kind of, whenever I'm sort of stuck in terms of thinking about a business, I go back and look at SaaS, right? In terms of, because it's just so clear cut how profit works and how all the unit economics work and all of it, right? But I mean, it's a playbook that everyone knows now. so there's not much arbitrage from a VC perspective. But I'm on the deep tech side, right? I tell founders I sit at the sort of center of this triangle, right? Which has sort of got the tech roadmap on one bit, which is sort of what's our tech advantage and how we're developing it and what engineering we're doing. What we're sort of hearing from customers in terms of what they need and how we turn those things into product. And then the thing that you said, which is kind of what's the vision, right? How do we create this sort of vision of the future, which has this tech at the heart and explains how the world is going to be different, right? And that is sort of very infectious and gets employees on board and gets customers on board and gets the rest of the world to believe that you're going to change. Things are going to change after this company has been built, right? And I just go back and forth around that triangle. So board meetings with me and founders is just, we basically debate that. We're like, are the financials okay? Let's go talk about these three things. And yeah, that's how it works for me.
Okay. Maybe Natalia, you want to follow up on that? Do you have a triangle? Do you have a square?
We have
What do you have?
Circle.
We invest in everything.
You have a circle.
A big circle of investment. So for us, when it comes to deep tech, and it's something that we've been investing for a while, but not as much.
Sure.
But now we're looking at it in a bigger way because of our position in Europe and in Asia, because we see that. And so, for example, we just launched a semiconductor innovation hub in Arizona. And now all of a sudden, everyone wants to okay, semiconductors is a big thing. But we really have to see each industry within deep tech differently, because it depends on the market potential. It depends on the particular sense of demand. It depends on where we're going to go ahead and go from quantum to edge to other things, right? But I think for us, more than anything, and we talked about people, we talked about market, we talked about the financial side of things. I would like to see how more easily it can be brought to market, right? How easily we can take it from lab to market, because there's so many policy obstacles for that. And I'll tell you from my own government We have a lot of them. Like a lot of things we can't sell to certain countries. We can't sell we can't invest in certain places, or we can't invest in things that were going to be sold to other places. So I wish that if we could look at it from how easy can we take out the regulatory obstacles out of the way. I think that would be something that we would really like to look at and try to solve together. I just feel like that's something that...
That's a very interesting perspective. I mean, sometimes regulation is not your friend, but sometimes you want it to steer things in the right direction, right? It's a very fine balance, and yeah, agreed. Ian, you have a take on this?
Maybe, commenting on this kind of market traction, because that's kind of challenging for Deeptech when in the beginning the business model, everything is very unclear. And since we're talking about how to make companies investable, of course, making early revenue is very important. And there, I think there's something that we can in Europe still learn a lot also from the US and do better, which is how we are actually using, let's say, innovative procurement, public procurement, to scale up companies. For us, so we are a spin out from a Finnish university, so we have the headquarters in Finland. Yeah. Finland is a relatively small country, so in this sense, it's also relatively easy to get access to the ministries and ministers. Mm-hmm. So we could convince the Finnish government actually that if they want to grow us, they should buy, or they should give some institution in Finland money to open a tender. And then, of course, if we win the tender, they would buy from us. And this worked very early on. We won the tender, we sold. And then we went to the commission and said, look, this is the way you should do it. And now, basically, at the moment, the Euro HPC program is doing this. But
listening?
I think, that's great. And many other countries are kind of following this model. So it works. But, of course, someone needs to go out there and kind of ring the bell all the time, but I think here we are missing still a huge opportunity in Europe in scaling up companies through innovative and public procurement processes.
And we had every crisis, like, don't lose a crisis, make sure that you take every crisis as an opportunity. We were very fortunate in the US because we were able to move legislation very quickly because we had to rescue the economy, big important part of our well-being. And so we were able to pass legislation that said everything, so for everything the US government had to buy, it was increased to 23%, from small businesses to women-owned companies, to veteran-owned companies, to underutilized companies, to veteran companies, and so on. And so it was, we used the government procurement process that doesn't cost much to increase the capacity for purchasing that. We spend 100 billion. No, actually we spend 500 billion, but 100 billion has to go to that program. And out of that, guess how much went to women-owned companies? Only 5%. We increased it to 5% for women-owned companies to sell to the US government. And this is not grants, these are not subsidies, these are contracts. 17.5 billion went to women-owned companies. These are, a part for these companies to grow. So procurement is really important. Smart procurement in order to grow those companies is key. Thank you for raising that.
Yeah, and what you said earlier about SBIRs, US has a fantastic program of SBIRs, exactly like you said. But I think there's something special about Finland. Just, invested in one company in Finland and just how that ecosystem works with the universities and the government and so on. It works really well.
Fantastic. Thanks for raising that, Ian. It was a very, very interesting point. Maybe our time is running out, so I'd like to start wrapping up. And I think a relevant part of any startup's journey is the role that mentors and advisors play in this journey. So when we're talking SaaS, we're talking, sort of business models that we know how they work and we know how to make them work. You can find mentors who have done this before and can help you and steer you in the right direction. When a deep tech startup comes along, how should they look at this search for a mentor and advisor? Like, what is your advice to them? Because it's not easy. And then Ian, I mean, you can comment on this as well, of course, if it's been easy or not for you, but what do you think?
So that is super hard, right? and I used to work at a fund which did bio And like, I was on the Deeptech side of the portfolio. And once I turned around to my colleague and I'm like, I'm really envious of you because, you invest in drugs and they're always produced the same way. The management team is the same business model. Like everything's the same until you get back to the science, right? So, how are you not just like minting money, right? Whereas like on my side of the aisle, it's like a different industry, different business. Like everything's different, every single time. But I think especially with deep tech and especially building really big companies from this disruptive kind of breakthrough technology, it's different every time, right? So what I like to do is that I invest with the founders, and then we try and get a really experienced industry chair on the board, someone who understands the industry, and then maybe a Ned, because from my perspective, it's just really important to have the customers really, really close. And I mean, basically, my strategy is to get them to review the company's product and go to market like every single board meeting, right? Every month, such that we really have that insight into the market, because they come up with a new product that industry hasn't seen before, maybe a brand new like go to market that they haven't seen before, and no one really knows, right? But you just need a couple people, around the table to be like, okay, yeah, I've seen this before. It looks like this other thing, right? So yeah, it's worthwhile, going down this route. And I think the other thing is, my job as an investor is to kind of help the founders interpret what's coming back from customers, right? Because the patterns of deep tech sort of going into industries sort of happen over and over again, right? Like there's similarities in terms of how they go in. So quite often I can look at kind of what we're hearing back from customers and say, this one looks like that story, right? So you tell the story of how microcontrollers like happened, right? That's the model to think about, and maybe that'll happen this way in this industry.
Great,
So
great advice.
I started my company, completely went bad, my first company, because I have several degrees and I know what I'm doing. I didn't know jack anything. So my second company, I decided to get mentors, which it's a great story. DuPont, which was one of our biggest chemical companies in the US and the world, which was absorbed by Dow. People were retiring. All these scientists and engineers were retiring. And they created this idea of like, I want to give back to society. So they became mentors. And that program, that small little program, became a federal program, which is called SCORE. Now we have over 15,000 mentors around the world, around the US. And anyone can ask and go if you want to start a company in the US. But we have all types of knowledge. So when people get to the retirement, there's so much knowledge. And in so many countries in Europe, if you go ahead and work at something like that, you don't get your pension. Back to smart policy. So how can we retain that amazing talent of people who are retiring? And about 20% of our companies in the US are started by people who retire. And want to go ahead and contribute. So how do we use that knowledge and talent and use it into something productive? And I swear, if I wouldn't have been for the SCORE mentors, my second company would have been as successful.
Yeah. Thank you. Interesting point. Ian.
Maybe just to close it up, because I totally agree. I think another important aspect actually is also the cultural fit. So when we raised our first round, one of our investors took me to the side and said, look, deep tech investment takes maybe 7 years or something until the exit. That's more than the duration of a typical marriage in Europe, right? So you better make sure that the people you kind of go to bed with, so to say, right? You get along with them, because it's going to be a long journey. And I think we heard earlier from the early bird this 24-hour example. So I think this is exactly then the risk. If you don't have the opportunity to get to know each other, to make sure, okay, also when there will be tough times, and there will be tough times, actually we have the same view on the things. We share somehow the same values and the culture. And of course, this is something that's then very important, in addition to the kind of background and the industry know-how and experience that they bring. But at least this is how I so far have done it. So all those people who are my trusted mentors, actually I get along very well with them. Some of them I invited to my wedding party. So it's really kind of a very good relationship that I have with them.
It's been beyond 7 years for you, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. So maybe one really quick last round the table. If you had to give one piece of advice, something to focus on, to a deep tech founder, as I suspect there are a few in the room, what would it be?
Be patient and diplomatic.
Okay. Patient and diplomatic.
You have to know how to ask for things and convince it over long term.
Ian?
I would say focus on the product thinking. At least for scientists, this is totally unclear, and probably you don't do it at all in the beginning. And to learn this too late, I think, is also not a good idea.
Product thinking. Excellent.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, I think of it a little bit differently. I tell founders, think about, imagine the tech isn't in your company or it's somewhere else's company. Where is it going to live, right? Like, imagine in 10 years' time, what does that look like, right? What is that category? What does that look like? And that gets back to product type thinking, right? Like, maybe it won't stay in your company will be bought, but imagine what that looks like if, like, Siemens buys it, right? Like, what will your technology look like? And if you can imagine that, then you can kind of work back to how you're going to make that happen.
Visualization. Excellent. Well, I can't thank you enough for sharing your experience.
Thank you.
Oh,
You've done a great job.
Okay, thank you. But a big round of applause to all of our panelists. And